and Shippy. Welcome to the Mastering Blood Sugar podcast. I'm so excited to have you on here with me today.
I'm so excited to be here. It's such a great topic. It's such an epidemic in our country.
Well, you're one of the foremost practitioners in functional medicine right now, really leading the charge. And you're seeing this every day in clinical practice. You're working with patients with diabetes. And so it's an honor to have you on to sort of talk about what you see in the trenches. You know, I find that in natural healthcare and functional medicine, even there's people who don't see a lot of diabetes, and they don't really understand the complexity of it. You know, they still think, even in natural healthcare, certainly in the general population, there's this idea that it's actually pretty simple. If you just cut out sugar and start exercising, it's going to go away. It's easy to reverse. And as you know, as I know, as I've learned over the years, that's just not the case. There's so many factors that affect blood sugar and hormone balance and insulin sensitivity and weight that really functional medicine gives us a nice toolbox, but a lot of people don't realize how complex this condition really can be.
It really is complex, but I want to make sure that I leave with it really, even though it's complex, it's very possible to get blood sugar into a normal range. Sometimes it's a little challenging to get all the pieces of the puzzle together, but it's one of those things that's very, very reversible and then also preventable.
Well, good. I'm glad you mentioned that because I believe the same thing. And it's not just a belief. You know, you and I have both seen that happen probably time and time again with clients, with patients. So very much is a realistic possibility for people. And we have to address, of course, find and address the root causes of what's driving their blood sugar out of balance in the first place. One of the things I want to talk to you about is digging a little deeper, because a lot of people have a standard lab test done. They'll have a standard lipid panel. They'll have a metabolic panel, hemoglobin A1C, maybe a few other tests. And that's it. And that's kind of what their doctors are working off of. But there's just so much more that we can look at and maybe need to look at. So would you mind talking about some of the testing and the workup that you do with your patients and certainly with someone with dysglycemia or blood sugar problems?
Thank you for asking that question. That's actually one of my favorite topics. As a previous engineer, I love data and I love being the detective and figuring out how to best help people to get that whole biochemistry and physiology back into balance. So one of my favorite places to start is something called an ion profile or a NutrEval that one of the companies offers to do that more functional medicine testing. So I love that because it gives me a very comprehensive view about what the patient's nutritional status is. So it looks at things like amino acids, fatty acids. So those are the fat distribution, the trace minerals, so things like magnesium, selenium, that also are very important for blood sugar. And then it looks a little bit at how the person's mitochondria are working. So the mitochondria are the little organelles inside the cells that if they're not working well, definitely the body's not going to be able to regulate blood sugar very well. And it also gives me some tips, some clues about whether we need to look for environmental toxins. So a lot of times one of the underlying causes for blood sugar abnormalities is that the person's toxins have built up in their body. And so we really need to look at things like their genetics for how well they're going to be able to detoxify and to be able to methylate if I see some signs that their body is on overload. And then it also does a little bit of a screening for heavy metals, which can also be related to blood sugar abnormalities.
Okay, wow. So that sounds like a really valuable, important test. You mentioned several things that I want to follow up on. One is nutrient status. Another one is mitochondrial function and health. And then you talked about toxins and the detoxification system, as well as heavy metals, which we could probably throw in there also. So let's kind of break each of those down over the next few minutes, if we could. With nutrients, what are some of the most common patterns you see for people who are dysglycemic or maybe in that full-blown diabetes range? Are there any patterns, or is it very, very different from person to person?
It is definitely different from person to person, But there's this, as I've been practicing functional medicine for over 12 years, I'm seeing more acuity and the degrees of the nutritional deficiency. So pretty much almost everybody that I see is deficient in magnesium. And as you know, magnesium is very important for blood sugar regulation. So almost everybody needs to be taking some magnesium. And the other thing I'm finding with that is that a lot of people just don't even absorb it very well. So we have to give it topically or sublingually to really get their magnesium levels into optimum range. And then the other thing with the nutritional testing is finding the mitochondrial dysfunction. And often that is then goes related to the environmental toxicity. It's also kind of a shocking thing that I'm seeing over the last 12 years is increasing signs for environmental toxicity. It's like many of our barrels are filling up. And because we just can't keep up with the degree of toxins that we're exposed to day to day in our food, in our hair, in our homes with our cleaning and our mattresses and spraying for pesticides and all those kinds of things.
Wow. So magnesium is one that you mentioned, which makes sense. Magnesium is involved in many, many different body functions and certainly in blood sugar regulation. And oftentimes people do better when they're taking magnesium supplements, like you said, if they're absorbing them. And I guess probably following up to make sure they are absorbing them. You can also do like a red blood cell magnesium on a blood test. Do you use that, or do you find that the NutrEval is a better option for that?
So I do find that the NutrEval is a better option because it is a red blood cell magnesium, and I get to see, a bigger picture of what's going on. I can also get some signs for if there is some issue with absorption in the gut. But most of the local labs, like a CPL or LabCorp Quest, can also do a red blood cell magnesium. But I find that the specialty labs are more accurate at actually detecting it. A serum magnesium just tells you how well your body's regulating it. It doesn't tell you about whether your stores are good enough. So that's a very good point to emphasize.
Yeah, good clarification. So a lot of people may have a magnesium test on a serum blood test, but that's not a good status indicator, as you just mentioned. What about chromium? Because chromium is obviously involved in blood sugar regulation intimately. So is this something that you see as low or off in people with blood sugar regulation problems?
That's actually another really good point. Chromium often is low unless the person's supplementing it already, and that it's actually an important mineral to monitor because too much chromium can be harmful. So some people think, oh, chromium's great, I'm going to start taking that, and it actually end up with high levels, which can be detrimental. So that it's a great thing to actually monitor how well you're doing, and don't think that more is better. Take a careful dose unless you actually have a healthcare provider to work with to monitor it. In contrast, magnesium, I find that you can't overdo magnesium. I really haven't seen anybody overdo magnesium.
That's good to know, other than maybe some bowel issues if they're not absorbing it well.
Magnesium is actually a great thing to take if you're tending towards the constipated side, because depending on the form, it can definitely get things moving there.
Yeah. It's funny. That was sort of the old remedy for constipation was citrated magnesium. You see it still in a lot of pharmacies, and a lot of my older patients use it and talk about it. But we don't see it used as much anymore. But it is a good remedy for getting things moving down there.
Right. So if you do tend towards the looser side with your stools, you want to use either a sublingual form of the magnesium or a topical form so that you're not running to the bathroom.
Okay, good advice. So let's talk about mitochondrial function. What do you see on a NutrEval? Is it B vitamin status? Are there other things that you're looking for there to indicate some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction?
Yes, so definitely markers for B vitamins. And then also it's called an organic oats panel. And so those are some of the metabolic byproducts of the mitochondrial function. So when we see those out of balance, it shows us that there's some inefficiencies in how well the mitochondria are working. And often people will, they won't really know that their mitochondria aren't working well unless they have extreme symptoms like, fatigue, extreme fatigue or muscle pain, things like that.
Yeah, but of course that's where the free fatty acids and the glucose get metabolized into energy. So the mitochondria is really where it's at. That's where all that really cellular metabolism happens. That part of energy metabolism anyway. So it's vital that those are working. And then we need things like CoQ10 and other important cofactors to drive carnitine and so forth to drive mitochondrial function.
Right. I find that most people benefit from taking some carnitine, some CoQ10, some D-ribose. And then one of my favorite things for really helping to restore the mitochondria is to take a supplement called phosphatidylcholine along with the correct fats. So you want the right proportion of omega-3s and 6s and 9s to actually be able to restore all your cell membranes, including the mitochondrial membranes. So those would be some of the top supplements that I think can also be really helpful with blood sugar.
How do you feel about dietary choline? There's a little controversy around that. A lot of people in the sort of the paleo primal community talk about the benefits of dietary choline from things like eggs. And then the people in the sort of the vegan community point out some of the problems with dietary choline that the research has indicated. Where do you lie there? What do you think makes the most sense with dietary choline?
Definitely we need the dietary choline, and I forget exactly what the statistics are, but it's a huge proportion of the U.S. population is actually deficient in choline. I think that's just a sign of our food supply being so deficient. So we really, you can't argue that we really need it. It's the main thing that actually helps our cell membranes to be healthy. I'm actually a big fan of eggs. The eggs, got such a bad rap for such a long time. But then when you really look at the data, I think it shows that eggs are beneficial. But what I find is the most effective for reversing the mitochondrial dysfunction is to use a high quality form of phosphatidylcholine. There are two brands that I really like. And warning, if you take the liquid form, which I think is the most effective, it does not taste good. I have to prepare my patients ahead of time because otherwise they come back and they're like, oh my God, you really want me to take this? But that's the Zymogen phosphatidylcholine and the Body Bio phosphatidylcholine. Those are the two that I have the most experience with over the years, is actually really supporting the cell membranes and the mitochondria. There is another brand as well that I've been using more recently that also looks like it's effective, and it doesn't taste quite as bad. So I can even get kids to take it. And that's Quicksilver phosphatidylcholine. And then with some of my patients, like I have a patient that had a really severe cardiomyopathy. So that's where, the heart function isn't working well. We did a couple months of some IV phosphatidylcholine, and his heart function's dramatically improved. So it's
amazing.
It's really, really exciting.
Great information. So let's talk a bit about diet, and then we'll come back to toxins and environmental toxins and heavy metals and some other things. But we just talked about these different dietary philosophies, and you said that you love eggs. You think eggs are a great idea. So can you talk about what your recommended diet is for most people with type 2 diabetes, and kind of why you landed on this particular eating approach?
So I want to say that everybody is individual. There's not a one size fits all. But the thing that I see, the diet that I see that works for most people is actually a paleo diet. And the thing that I love about this is to be able to watch the biochemical markers. So I look at things, we'll say, okay, let's do this for 4 months. Or for 4 weeks, and then let's look at the data before and after and see what happens to your markers. So when I ask people to do a paleo diet, I actually go back to the Lauren Cordain, who did a lot of the initial research. So it is no gluten, meticulous on the gluten, no dairy, not even ghee, no grains, and then you can eat lots of vegetables, the best forms of animal protein that you can get as close to wild caught, some nuts and seeds, and a little bit of fruit. Especially with the blood sugar things, we don't want to overdo the fruit. So then we go our 4 weeks where people are meticulous about it. If they mess up, they start over. And then we look at their hemoglobin A1C, their insulin levels, their blood sugar. But then the other thing that I like to do is a very detailed look at their lipid status. So something like a Boston Heart or Cleveland Clinic, where we're, instead of just looking at the traditional cholesterol markers that you would get through most doctors' offices, we look at the size of the cholesterol particles for both the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. So that would be like the VLDL and the detailed HDLs too. And then we want to look at the markers for inflammation that actually reflect what's going on inside the blood vessels. So that's an LP-PLA2, an MPO, the high sensitivity CRP, and a fibrinogen. And it's amazing the difference that we can see in 4 weeks with that diet when people do it well. So not sneaking in the dairy, not sneaking in the gluten, no sugar, just really, really meticulous on the diet. And sometimes that's all we need to do. It's nice to look at the other taking the supplements and all that kind of thing, but getting that diet nailed down. And I've even had some patients with type 1, early onset type 1 diabetes, and seeing that bounce back. If we catch them early and they'll do the diet meticulous, it's pretty incredible what can happen.
Wow. Well, that's great news for a lot of people listening. Real quick, how do you feel about starchy vegetables? Because I know they're, allowed on a paleo style diet, but can be a problem for some people with blood sugar issues.
What I find is that when people are managing how much fruit they're eating and managing not having any actual sugar and just minimal sweeteners, like not even very much honey or stevia, because I think those can also be very confusing for the whole insulin signaling pathway, that people can actually eat the starchy vegetables. You don't want to go crazy on them, but they can eat a sweet potato, they can eat beets, they can eat plantains in small amounts, because they actually there's enough fiber in those vegetables that they maintain their blood sugar when they're doing everything else really well.
Yeah, and those are low in fructose, which a lot of people get confused because glucose, when it's absorbed from food, can raise blood sugar. But fructose, high levels of fructose can be even more damaging, because when you really understand some of the underlying mechanisms of diabetes, a lot of this happens in the liver, and the liver gets very congested with fat buildup and becomes insulin resistant. And when you're insulin resistant and you're not utilizing your macronutrients effectively, and you get an overload of fructose, that's all going to get converted to triglycerides in the liver. It's all going to get converted into fat through de novo lipogenesis. So that's going to drive more fatty liver. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is going to drive more triglycerides in the bloodstream, which is going to make us more insulin resistant. So starchy vegetables are very low in fructose, which is nice. And I think the body can utilize that glucose a little better on a low carb diet.
Well, and I see that all the time with patients, and it's really interesting because, fruit season being the summer, it's very common, like at the end of the summer, if I'm following up with somebody and looking and seeing what's going on with their hemoglobin A1C, if it's bumped up, it's because they've gone to town on the fruit for the summer. So it really is a very important thing to know, to keep. It's not that you have to cut out the fruit, but just, keep it to half a cup at the time. And then having the fruit that's lower glycemic seems to make a difference. So having it with the fiber can be helpful.
Let's talk about fiber a bit, because I think fiber is something that's really important, really for all of us, but especially for people with diabetes and blood sugar problems. And sometimes people who start to follow a low carbohydrate diet or even a paleo diet can be lacking in fiber. Interestingly, according to some research, like what Lauren Cordain says, our Paleolithic ancestors ate 100 plus grams of fiber a day, way more than we even come close to. In common day, in current day times, for the common person, where are they getting most of their fiber on a paleo diet like you recommended?
Well, that's so important, because all the data across all these different diets, the thing that really shows the health benefits are the vegetables. Like, we really should be eating 6 to 10 cups of vegetables a day at a minimum with the fiber. I mean, doing the green juicing is helpful to get some extra nutrients in, but it doesn't count as your fiber. The patients will actually start eating the vegetables for breakfast, really notice that their blood sugar gets stabilized more quickly. So, sauteing some kale with whatever they're having for breakfast, or putting the vegetables into a smoothie. It's such a great way to start the day. And I think if you're monitoring your blood sugar throughout the day, you'll show that that's one of the key things that really makes a difference, is to get those vegetables in early and then throughout the day.
Great. Let's shift gears and talk a bit about environmental toxins. You mentioned this earlier with the NutrEval test and detoxification systems in the body, but there's more and more research, emerging research on environmental toxins. You mentioned that you had looked and found some current research. Can you talk about that a bit, and how you think toxins play a role in diabetes pathogenesis or development of blood sugar problems?
Yes, such an important topic that a lot of times people just don't even realize. So there's some other studies that show that the correlation with how the body is loaded with toxins is a better predictor for who gets diabetes than weight. So this old paradigm that weight's really what causes the risk for diabetes is really shifting. So then last night, in preparation for this, because of course I always like to have the latest data, I went onto PubMed and was looking to see what was there currently on the association between toxins and diabetes or metabolic syndrome. And there were tons of new studies. And the thing that was so compelling to me is also one of my favorite topics, and that's exposure to toxic mold. And there were 3 new studies on 3 different mycotoxins and the link between blood sugar issues with them. So for people that are really having trouble getting their blood sugar under control with the other things that we talked about, making sure that they have the optimal diet for them for blood sugar and some of the things we haven't talked about. So, managing stress and taking the right supplements to help support their pathways and supporting their mitochondria. If they're still struggling with blood sugar, you have to look at environmental exposures. Are they, do they have a job that's exposing them to environmental toxins? So things like, doing construction or air conditioner systems, or spraying pesticides, or, some type of manufacturing. You got to look at what your day-to-day exposures are, as well as, are you in a home or working in a building that has toxic mold?
How do you know that? For example, how would you know if your home had toxic mold or you were working in a building with toxic mold?
That is a whole nother podcast. There's not an easy answer. I do have a book on Amazon that is a workbook on it. And then there are a couple of videos that I've done that are out there on toxic mold and how to approach that. But it really is a complex topic, because a lot of times the problem's hidden. So if you know that you've had a leak in your house, the roof's leaked, the windows leaked, toilets overflowed, things like that, or there's a musty smell, which isn't present all the time, then it's highly likely. But many buildings, it's hidden in the air conditioning system, or a leak that you didn't even know happened, because it's just hidden.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back to do another podcast on toxic mold, because I know it's important.
I definitely would love to do that because I really think it's an epidemic. The way that homes and buildings are being built to meet these energy standards make them much more likely to get moldy.
Yeah. A few minutes ago, you mentioned stress as a big factor. Can you talk a bit about how you see stress relating to blood sugar and diabetes?
Yeah, so stress can definitely cause many direct and indirect ways for causing blood sugar dysregulation. And for those of you that are monitoring your blood sugar, you'll actually see the blood sugar being more likely to spike when you're stressed. So the whole interaction between the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and then changing what happens with the chemical messengers to then just make it more likely that your cells aren't going to recognize insulin. So I've really, like almost every patient that I work with, I like them to have some type of stress reduction that they do. The putting a daily even 5 to 20-minute meditation in, or listening to some type of relaxation, doing yoga, you'll actually start to see that your blood sugar improves when you implement those things. It's very powerful. And then I have a device that I love that does the meditation and neurofeedback together called the Muse. So those are easy to order online. I actually had a mold exposure about 2 years ago where my body got stuck in limbic loop, where I was just in that fight or flight, run from the tiger. Everything was kind of overwhelming and a disaster. And doing the Muse really helped my body to get back into that state where, okay, there's something going on. Let's figure out the solution. We can address it rather than being, oh my God, we got to move the tribe.
Wow. That's amazing. We'll have to have people check that out. How do you spell that?
MUSE.
MUSE, Muse.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really, really easy to use and very, very effective over the period of a few weeks to months. It can dramatically affect how well your body's responding to stress and what actually is stressful for you. It's such a great a wearable. You know, so many of the things that people are doing today now are informing them where they are, but this actually changes where you are with your physiology.
Wow, that sounds really helpful. I love these devices that can kind of help you to manage stress or help you tap into some of these strategies to manage stress, because we know that meditation is fantastic. There's a lot of research on it. People who have done it know the benefits firsthand, but while it doesn't need to be complicated, it can be hard for people who are used to constant stimulation. And as a first step, I oftentimes recommend doing something like heart math or watching a visualization video on YouTube that's relaxing to them, to kind of at least get them in the habit of sitting and getting into a meditative state. And it sounds like this device could be helpful as well.
Yes, and all of those things can work great together. What I love about this is the neurofeedback part of it, so that it's like amplifying what you're doing with the meditation, because it's giving the feedback to the brain. Oh, okay, we can relax. We can get in that alpha state, which is relaxing. I'm a long-term meditator. I've done all kinds of different meditations over 25 years, and I truly believe in it. It is amazing. And then this just took it to the next level.
What's your secret for people who are having a hard time meditating? What do you tell them to do?
Okay, so the big thing is there's research that shows that even if you think you're doing a crummy job at meditating, it's still providing benefit. So no judgment. So what I noticed with the Muse, because it gives you so much feedback, is that the information going on in my mind when I was really stuck in the limbic loop, I would still be thinking about, okay, I've got this going on with my kids, or my to-do list, or whatever the stressors were, they would pop into my mind. So the same thing was happening when I was in the relaxed state, but my body was responding differently. So I guess the main message is drop the judgment, just do it anyway, and be kind with yourself while you're doing it.
That sounds like great advice. I think that's good advice for all of us.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we are just about out of time, but I've got three questions that I love to ask, and we're going to have you back for sure because we have so much more we could talk about. But I have these three questions I'd like to ask, and before I do that, before I ask these three questions, I would just like to ask you if you have, well, first of all, if people want to learn more about you, read your blog, find out about what you're doing, or maybe even about your practice, what's the best place for them to find you?
My website is AnnShippyMD.com. So ANN and Shippy, SHIPPY, and then MD.com. And we're posting lots of good information that has some of these tips. And then on Facebook, I'm doing a Sundays with Dr. Shippy. So you can join me in Minoritiness, and I share a couple studies that have come out each week and what I think you can do about them to help you know to be on the leading edge to get the healthiest.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Sundays with Dr. Shippy. I love that. And do you have a bonus tip or anything you want to share with people that you think can be helpful?
Okay, so one thing that has to do with blood sugar is just get some organic cinnamon and start throwing it into everything. The research on cinnamon is incredible. It's been so well studied, and it's one of the simple, easy things that you can do to stabilize your blood sugar. So I even put it in my tea in the mornings, and then I try to throw it in everything that I can. Of course, get the organic so that you're not adding the toxins.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Cinnamon. That's great. So these three questions, the first one, Anne, is if you could come up with a quote or a statement or a concept, an idea that really characterizes your work professionally, something that people would know you by, what do you think that would be?
So I get called in as the detective doctor. So my colleagues and how I'm known around the community is that I'm the detective doctor. So unfortunately, a lot of times when I'm meeting the patient for the first time, they're saying, okay, if you can't help me, I'm giving up. So what I bring to the way that I care for patients is that I've had my own disasters, multiple health disasters, which I bring compassion to where people are. And then with my scientific engineering background, I love the challenge of finding the data, the information about what the root causes are, and then helping to find the body's way of repairing. And then because I've had the situations where, it's really scary. I had points where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to take care of myself, much less my kids and my patients. So just the hope and understanding that the body is so amazing that when it has what it needs and it's not being overwhelmed, it can heal in such amazing ways.
That's a powerful message. And a lot of people listening to this likely have been struggling with diabetes and other health challenges for years and probably have considered giving up many, many times. It's very easy with diabetes to put your head in the sand, at least with type 2, and pretend it doesn't exist. And it just gets way worse. So,
well, and even worse is, sometimes we do need the Band-Aids, we need the medications, but the idea of just settling to take the medications and not work on the underlying causes and getting the body working better, it's so upsetting that people don't know that there's other things that they can be doing to get their body back into balance. So I'm so happy they're doing this podcast so that people can learn that they can get well and not just Band-Aid it with the medications.
Thank you. So the second question kind of goes to that topic, which is if you had a friend or family member who came to you and just asked for your advice, really as a friend, as a doctor too, but really as a friend or family member, they were just recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and you had maybe 2 or 3 minutes to just kind of sort of give them your best advice, what would you tell them to do?
Well, the first thing would be to get my information on the optimal paleo diet. Just not be overwhelmed. Just get started on eating in a low inflammation, high nutrient way. And it's amazing what a difference just that alone can make. So giving them the most important information on how powerful the diet is, and that the nutrients that they're eating are information for the body to know how to work, and then the resources for the body to work. So if they could just do that one thing to get started, and then call me when they got that down.
Perfect. Step by step. And I think that's important. A lot of people get overwhelmed with all this information, and, maybe we're making things worse by throwing even more out here with our diabetes summit and this podcast and so forth. But I do think it's important to expose people to the truth and ideas, and hope, give them hope that they can get well and they can find solutions. But I also think we need to break it down and take it step by step. And like you said, be kind with yourself, be gentle with yourself, and you can't rush healing. The body can heal itself. It's amazing, but we have to be willing to take it step by step and give the body the time and love and resources it needs to heal.
That's beautiful. I love that. That's a great way to put it.
All right. Well, last question for you today is, if you found yourself around a table with 20 of the world's leaders, presidents and prime ministers, and they were trying to solve the diabetes epidemic. They realized the strain. They finally woke up and said, we need to do something different here. And they came to you. They brought you in as an expert. What advice would you give them?
I look forward to that someday. One of the things that I see is our biggest health crisis in our country and our world is what we're doing to pollute the environment. It's impossible to get clean air, clean water, clean homes with our current mindset of how we're managing industry, we're managing farming. We are all getting polluted, and it's very, very concerning. And so we need different policies across the world of being very conscientious of what is accumulating in our environment. It's really shocking, the lack of control. There's a new pesticide that's being introduced into our agriculture, and it really hasn't been studied on humans. It's definitely one of the things that's affecting the bees. There's lots of bee studies, but we don't even know how it's going to impact humans, and it's being put into the environment tons at a time. So it's going to be like the glyphosate is now, where I don't have a patient that doesn't at least have a detectable glyphosate level. There hasn't been one because it's so permeated into our environment, and it's highly likely, based on how animals are, the couple of animal studies, that it's going to be a neurotoxin for humans. Wow. So we really have to be changing our policy for what it takes to be to make sure that something is safe, rather than the way that the policy is now, where it gets introduced into the environment and then we find out by default that it's problematic.
I think that's so important because environmental agencies and environmental concerns seem to be very focused on the environment and on the earth, which is important, but I don't think enough people are making that bridge to human health and the financial and health implications that it's having on our cultures and our societies. And perhaps if there was a way for people to make that connection between what we're doing to our environment and the cost that that's having in our in human health and in our healthcare system, then maybe people would take it more seriously.
Well, I think a lot of people are just misinformed. They think that before these chemicals are put into the environment that there's safety tests done on them, and there's not. So I think we need to really increase awareness about these policies, and I think people will be very wanting this change, so that before there's huge exposure to their children and loved ones, that we know if it's safe or not. I think it's really an important message to get out there.
There you have it. Dr. Ann Shippy, thank you so much for being with me today and for being part of the Mastering Blood Sugar podcast.
Thank you so much. I know that you're going to provide so much information to people and help them to be so much healthier, have tools in their toolbox. Thank you so much for doing this and inviting me.
Thank you for that. To check out Dr. Shippy, go to AnnShippyMD.com. You can read her awesome blog and get some great information there from her, find out about her practice. And thanks for being part of the Mastering Blood Sugar podcast. This is Dr. Brian Mowll, the diabetes coach, and I will be back next week with another expert interview.